The clock on Officer Derek Thompson's dashboard showed 8:47 p.m. as he slowly drove through the quiet streets of Riverside Heights. This was the kind of neighborhood where million-dollar homes sat behind perfectly trimmed hedges and luxury cars lined the driveways. Derek had been patrolling this area for 3 years now, and he knew it like the back of his hand. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the way the streetlights cast long shadows between the oak trees. Or maybe it was just another ordinary Tuesday that would soon become anything but ordinary. Derek adjusted his radio and took a sip of his coffee. The liquid had gone, cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. His shift was almost over, and he was looking forward to getting home to catch the game highlights. That's when he saw him. A tall black man in an expensive-looking navy suit was walking down Maple Street, with confident steps. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and seemed to know exactly where he was going. Something about the scene bothered Derek, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The man looked to be in his late 40s, with graying hair at his temples and polished dress shoes that clicked against the sidewalk. His suit looked like it cost more than Derek made in a month. A gold watch caught the light from the street lamp as the man checked the time. Derek slowed his patrol car and watched. The man wasn't doing anything wrong. Not really. He was just walking. But in Derek's mind, questions started forming. What was someone like him doing in this neighborhood at this time of night? The expensive clothes, the confident walk, the briefcase, it all seemed out of place somehow. Derek had seen his share of break-ins in this area. Usually they happened when thieves thought wealthy homeowners were away on vacation or business trips. The man could be casing houses looking for easy targets. Derek's training told him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him something wasn't right. He picked up his radio and called it in. Unit 47 to dispatch. I've got a suspicious person walking through Riverside Heights. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, well-dressed. I'm going to make contact. The radio crackled back. Copy that, Unit 47. Do you need backup? Derek thought about it for a moment. The man didn't look dangerous, but you never knew these days. Send Unit 23 if they're available, just as a precaution. Derek pulled his patrol car up to the curb about 20 feet ahead of where the man was walking. He got out slowly, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. His heart was beating a little faster than usual, the way it always did when he was about to make contact with someone. Excuse me, sir, Derek called out, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned to project during his 8 years on the force. I'd like to have a word with you. The man stopped walking and turned around. His face showed no surprise, no fear, no guilt, just mild curiosity. This struck Derek as odd. Most people showed some kind of reaction when a police officer approached them, especially at night. Good evening, officer, the man said calmly. His voice was deep and measured, with the kind of educated tone Derek associated with lawyers or doctors. Is there something I can help you with? Derek approached slowly, keeping his posture professional but alert. I'm Officer Thompson with the Metropolitan Police. I'm patrolling this area tonight and noticed you walking through the neighborhood. Mind if I ask what brings you to this part of town? The man's expression remained neutral. I'm heading home. From work, he replied simply. Home from work? Derek repeated, looking around at the expensive houses lining the street. You live around here? That's correct. Derek studied the man's face, looking for any signs of deception. People lied to police officers all the time, and Derek had gotten pretty good at spotting when someone wasn't being truthful. But this man's eyes were steady, his posture relaxed. If he was lying, he was very good at it. I'm going to need to see some identification, Derek said, pulling out his small notepad. It was a standard request, one he'd made thousands of times before. Without hesitation, the man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black leather wallet. He handed Derek a driver's license with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout their conversation. Derek looked at the license under his flashlight. The name read Commander Joseph Washington, with an address on Oak Ridge Drive, one of the most expensive streets in Riverside Heights. The photo matched the man standing in front of him, and the license appeared to be legitimate. Commander? Derek asked, looking up from the license. You military? Something like that. The man replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Derek walked back to his patrol car to run the license through the system. As he waited for the results to come back, he watched the man in his rearview mirror. Joseph Washington stood exactly where Derek had left him, not fidgeting, not looking around nervously, not showing any of the typical signs of someone who had something to hide. The radio crackled to life. Unit 47, the license comes back clean. No warrants, no outstanding issues. Derek frowned. Everything seemed to check out, but something still felt off to him. Maybe it was the expensive clothes, or maybe it was just the fact that he didn't recognize this Joseph Washington despite patrolling this neighborhood for years. How could someone live on Oak Ridge Drive without Derek ever seeing him before? He got out of his car and walked back to where Washington was waiting. Everything seems to be in order, Derek said, handing back the license. But I have to ask, that's a pretty expensive watch you're wearing there. Nice suit too. What kind of work do you do that allows you to afford this neighborhood? For the first time since their conversation began, Derek saw a flicker of something cross Washington's face. It might have been surprise or maybe annoyance. It was gone so quickly that Derek almost missed it. I work for the city, Washington answered, his voice still calm but with a slight edge that hadn't been there before. The city? Derek pressed. Doing what exactly? Washington looked at Derek for a long moment before answering. I work in administration. Derek nodded, but he wasn't satisfied with the vague response. People who could afford million-dollar homes usually didn't work in basic city administration. Something about this whole situation was starting to bother him more and more. The sound of another patrol car pulling up behind his own caught Derek's attention. His backup had arrived. Officer Rachel Martinez stepped out of Unit 23 and approached the scene. She'd been Derek's backup on dozens of calls over the past 2 years, and she could usually read his mood pretty well. Tonight something seemed different. Derek looked tense, more worked up than a simple ID check usually made him. Everything okay here? Rachel asked as she joined them on the sidewalk. Just having a conversation with Mr. Washington here, Derek replied, gesturing toward the man in the expensive suit. He says he lives in the neighborhood, but I've never seen him before. Rachel looked at Joseph Washington, taking in his professional appearance and calm demeanor. Nothing about him screamed criminal to her trained eye. If anything, he looked like he belonged in this upscale neighborhood more than she did. Sir, have you been drinking tonight? Derek asked suddenly, stepping closer to Washington. I'm detecting what might be the odor of alcohol. Washington's eyebrows raised slightly. Officer, I haven't had anything to drink. I don't drink alcohol. Derek moved even closer, making a show of sniffing the air around Washington. Maybe it's something else then. Could be marijuana. You been smoking tonight, Mr. Washington? I have not, Washington replied firmly. His voice remained controlled, but Rachel could see his jaw tighten slightly. Rachel frowned. She was standing close enough to smell anything on Washington herself, and she detected nothing except perhaps a hint of expensive cologne. Derek seemed to be fishing for reasons to escalate this encounter, and it made her uncomfortable. Derek, Rachel said quietly, trying to catch her partner's attention. Maybe. I'm going to need you to empty your pockets, Derek interrupted, speaking to Washington. And I'd like to take a look inside that briefcase. Washington's posture straightened. Officer Thompson, I've cooperated with your request so far, but I'm going to have to respectfully decline. You have no legal basis for searching my person or my belongings. I have reasonable suspicion, Derek shot back, his voice getting louder. You're in an area known for break-ins. You can't give me a straight answer about your job, and I'm detecting suspicious odors. What you're detecting is your own imagination, Washington said, his calm facade beginning to crack slightly. And walking through a neighborhood while black is not reasonable suspicion of anything. Derek's face flushed red. This has nothing to do with race. Don't try to make this about something it's not. But even as Derek said it, Rachel realized that Washington was probably right. She'd seen Derek make dozens of stops in this neighborhood over the years. and she couldn't remember him ever being this persistent with a well-dressed white person who provided valid identification. By now, their conversation had attracted attention. A woman walking her dog had stopped across the street to watch. A couple coming home from dinner slowed their car to see what was happening. Someone in one of the nearby houses had turned on their porch light. Washington noticed the growing audience and made a decision. He pulled out his cell phone and held it up so Derek Coy could see it. "I'm going to record the rest of this interaction for my own protection." "Put that phone away," Derek demanded. "You don't have permission to record me." "Actually, I do," Washington replied calmly, starting the recording. "This is a public street, and I have every right to record a police encounter." Derek looked like he wanted to grab the phone, but Rachel stepped forward. "Derek, he's right. He can record if he wants to." More people were gathering now. The woman with the dog had crossed the street and was openly watching from about 30 feet away. A teenager had appeared on one of the front porches, his own phone out and recording. The couple in the car had parked and gotten out to see what was happening. "Folks, please move along," Derek called out to the growing crowd. "This is police business." Nobody moved. If anything, more people seemed to be arriving. Word was clearly spreading through the neighborhood that something was happening on Maple Street. Derek turned back to Washington, who was still holding his phone steady, recording everything. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to consent to a search. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have any problem with it. And I'm going to tell you one more time that I decline," Washington replied. "I know my rights, officer. You cannot search me or my belongings without probable cause, and you don't have it." "What I have," Derek said, stepping closer until he was almost chest to chest with Washington, "is a suspicious person who's being uncooperative and giving me attitude." Rachel felt her stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of situation that ended up on the evening news, and not in a good way. "Derek, maybe we should call a supervisor," she suggested. "I don't need a supervisor to handle one uncooperative individual," Derek snapped. The woman with the dog spoke up from across the street. "Officer, that man hasn't done anything wrong. He's just walking down the street." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Derek called back, but his voice cracked slightly. He was clearly feeling the pressure of having an audience. Washington continued recording steadily. "Officer Thompson, you've detained me for walking while black in an expensive neighborhood. You've demanded identification, which I provided. You've made false claims about detecting odors that don't exist. And now you're threatening me because I won't consent to an illegal search." "This isn't about race," Derek shouted loud enough that his voice echoed off the houses around them. The teenager on the porch called out, "Dude, it's totally about race. We can all see what's happening here." More phones were coming out now. Rachel counted at least 4 people recording the encounter from different angles. This was going to be all over social media within the hour, and it wasn't going to look good for the department. "Derek," Rachel said more urgently, "we need to de-escalate this situation right now." But Derek seemed to be past the point of listening to reason. He was staring at Washington with barely contained anger, his hand moving unconsciously toward his duty belt. "Sir, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with a police investigation," Derek announced suddenly. "What investigation?" Washington asked, his voice sharp for the first time. "What exactly am I obstructing?" "You're obstructing my ability to do my job," Derek replied, reaching for his handcuffs. The crowd stirred nervously. Several people called out protests. Someone shouted, "This is wrong." Another voice yelled, "He didn't do anything." Rachel stepped between Derek and Washington. "Derek, stop. You can't arrest him for obstruction when he hasn't obstructed anything." "Get out of my way, Martinez," Derek warned. Washington looked directly into his phone camera, speaking clearly for the recording. "My name is Joseph Washington. It's Tuesday, September 9th, approximately 9:15 p.m. I'm being threatened with arrest by Officer Thompson of the Metropolitan Police for walking through my own neighborhood while black." Derek's hand moved to his weapon, and the crowd gasped, collectively. "Officer Thompson," Washington said, his voice carrying a new authority that made Derek freeze mid-motion, "I strongly suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The authority in Washington's voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the tone of someone trying to intimidate or threaten. It was the voice of someone who was used to being in command, someone who expected to be listened to and obeyed. Derek's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Something had shifted in the air around them, and he could feel it, even if he couldn't quite understand what it was. "Officer Thompson," Washington continued, his voice steady and clear, "before you do something that will end your career and possibly land you in federal prison, I need you to look at something." With his free hand, the hand that wasn't holding his phone, Washington reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Derek tensed, but Washington's movements were deliberate and non-threatening. What Washington pulled out wasn't a weapon or a threat. It was a badge, not just any badge. A gold shield that gleamed under the streetlights with the words Metropolitan Police Department clearly visible around the top. Below that, in bold letters that Derek could read even from several feet away, was the word Commander. Derek's blood turned to ice in his veins. Washington held the badge up so that Derek, Officer Martinez, and all the witnesses could see it, clearly. "Officer Thompson, I am Commander Joseph Washington, Head of Internal Affairs for the Metropolitan Police Department, badge number 1247. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. His mouth fell open, and all the color drained from his face. Behind him, he heard Officer Martinez gasp audibly. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, recognizing Washington now that she knew who he was. She'd seen him at department meetings, at training sessions, at award ceremonies. He was one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire department, and Derek had just spent the last 20 minutes treating him like a criminal. The crowd was murmuring now, phones still recording, capturing every moment of what was clearly going to become a major news story. The woman with the dog was shaking her head in disbelief. The teenager on the porch was filming with a huge grin on his face. "Commander Washington," Derek stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea." "No, Officer Thompson, you had no idea," Washington replied, lowering his badge but keeping his phone recording. "You had no idea that the black man walking through this neighborhood might actually belong here. You had no idea that someone who looks like me could afford to live on Oak Ridge Drive. You had no idea that I might be your superior officer." Derek felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. 8 years on the force, and he'd never been in a situation remotely like this one. He'd just racially profiled the head of internal affairs, the very department that investigated police misconduct. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Derek tried weakly. "I had reports of suspicious activity in the area." "What reports?" Washington asked sharply. "You told me yourself that you stopped me because you noticed me walking and it seemed out of place." "There were no reports, Officer Thompson. There was just a black man in an expensive suit, and you decided that was suspicious enough to warrant detention and harassment." Officer Martinez stepped forward, her face pale. "Commander Washington, sir, I apologize for—" "Officer Martinez," Washington interrupted, "you have nothing to apologize for. You tried multiple times to de-escalate this situation. You attempted to prevent your partner from making a career-ending mistake. I noticed that." Rachel felt a small surge of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the horror of what she'd just witnessed. Derek was her partner, her friend, and she'd just watched him destroy his career in real time. "But Commander," Derek said desperately, "you never identified yourself. If you had just told me who you were from the beginning—" Washington's eyes flashed with anger for the first time since the encounter began. "Officer Thompson, I should not have to identify myself as a police commander to receive basic human dignity and respect. Every citizen, regardless of their race or appearance, deserves to be treated with professionalism by law enforcement. The fact that you think my rank changes anything proves exactly how wrong your behavior was tonight." The crowd was getting larger. More neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion and the flashing police lights. Word was spreading quickly through the gathering that the man Derek had been harassing was actually a high-ranking police official. Someone in the crowd called out, "Is that really a police commander?" Washington turned toward the voice and held up his badge again. Yes, I am Commander Joseph Washington with the Metropolitan Police Department. And yes, I was just stopped, detained, and threatened with arrest for walking through my own neighborhood. Murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Phones were everywhere now, recording from multiple angles. Derek could practically see his career circling the drain. Commander Washington, Derek tried again. I want you to know that this had nothing to do with race. I would have stopped anyone who looked suspicious in this neighborhood. Washington stared at Derek for a long moment before responding. Officer Thompson, in my 23 years with this department, I have investigated hundreds of complaints of racial profiling and misconduct. I have heard that exact statement countless times from officers who were caught behaving exactly as you did tonight. He gestured to the crowd around them. Do you see any of these witnesses, Billy? Giving that statement? Do you think the dozen people recording this encounter are going to believe that this had nothing to do with race? Derek looked around at the faces in the crowd. The woman with the dog was shaking her head. The teenager on the porch was openly laughing. The couple who had gotten out of their car looked disgusted. The truth is, Washington continued, that you saw a black man in an expensive suit and immediately assumed he didn't belong here. You invented suspicious odors that didn't exist. You demanded to search my belongings without any legal justification, and when I exercised my constitutional rights, you became aggressive and threatened me with arrest. Washington held up his phone, which was still recording. All of this is documented, Officer Thompson. Your voice, your words, your actions, the witnesses, the illegal detention, the threats, all of it. Derek felt sick to his stomach. He could see his life imploding in real time. The job he'd worked so hard for, the pension he'd been building toward, the respect he'd earned in the community. All of it was disappearing before his eyes. What happens now? Derek asked quietly. Washington looked at him with something that might have been pity. Now, Officer Thompson, you're going to learn why internal affairs exists and why our investigations are so thorough. You're going to discover that actions have consequences, and that wearing a badge doesn't protect you from accountability. The sound of more sirens in the distance indicated that additional units were responding. Word had clearly gotten back to dispatch about what was happening on Maple Street. Commander, Officer Martinez said hesitantly, should I radio in to let them know the situation is under control? Washington nodded. Tell them that Commander Washington is on scene and that additional units are not needed for emergency response. But they can send a supervisor. We're going to need one. By 10:30 that night, the videos were everywhere. Racist cop stops his own boss read the caption on the first video that went viral. Within an hour, Oneirk Riverside Heights was trending on social media platforms across the country. The teenager who had filmed from his porch had uploaded his footage with the title, Police Officer Racially Profiles Police Commander. You won't believe what happens next. The video had been shared over 50,000 times before midnight. Police Chief Maria Rodriguez was at home, settling in for the evening with a cup of tea and a book when her phone started buzzing. The first call was from the night supervisor, Sergeant Williams, reporting a situation involving one of his officers and a member of the command staff. The second call was from the department's public relations director, who had already seen the videos spreading online. The third call was from the mayor. By 11 p.m., Chief Rodriguez was dressed and driving toward headquarters, where Commander Washington was already waiting in her office. She'd known Joseph for over 15 years, had worked her way up through the ranks alongside him, and had never seen him look as tired as he did tonight. Joseph, she said as she entered her office, I've seen the videos. Are you okay? Washington looked up from where he was sitting in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, but otherwise still looked exactly as professional as he had when Derek Thompson first spotted him on Maple Street. Physically, I'm fine, Washington replied. Professionally, well, that remains to be seen. Chief Rodriguez sat down behind her desk and pulled up the videos on her computer. She watched in silence as the encounter unfolded, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. When she reached the part where Derek's hand moved toward his weapon, she closed her eyes and shook her head. How bad is this going to get? She asked. It's already bad, Washington replied. The videos have been viewed millions of times. Every major news outlet is picking up the story. My phone hasn't stopped ringing with calls from reporters. As if on cue, Washington's phone buzzed with another call. He glanced at it and declined. That was CNN. Chief Rodriguez rubbed her temples. What do you want to do about Thompson? What I want is irrelevant, Washington said firmly. What's going to happen is what should happen according to department policy and the law. Officer Thompson will be placed on administrative leave immediately pending a full investigation. His actions tonight violated multiple department policies and potentially several federal civil rights laws. And Officer Martinez? Washington considered this for a moment. Martinez tried to de-escalate. She recognized that Thompson was out of line and attempted to intervene. But she could have done more. She should have called for a supervisor earlier, should have been more forceful in stopping her partner's behavior. Chief Rodriguez nodded. Mandatory retraining? At minimum, and a formal reprimand. Officers have a duty to intervene when they witness misconduct, and while Martinez made some effort, it wasn't enough. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Chief Rodriguez's assistant opened it to reveal Derek Thompson, still in uniform, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 hours. Chief Rodriguez, you wanted to see me. Come in, Thompson, sit down. Derek entered the office and immediately saw Commander Washington sitting in the chair next to where he was directed to sit. The two men made eye contact briefly, and Derek quickly looked away. Thompson, Chief Rodriguez began, I've reviewed the video evidence of tonight's encounter. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I make my decision about your employment status? Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He'd spent the drive to headquarters thinking about what he might say, how he might explain or justify his actions. But sitting here now, with Washington beside him and the chief staring at him with barely controlled anger, all his prepared explanations seemed hollow. Ma'am, I made a mistake tonight, Derek said quietly. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I treated Commander Washington in a way that was unprofessional and inappropriate. Is that all? Chief Rodriguez asked. Derek swallowed hard. I know that my actions tonight were wrong. I know that they've embarrassed the department and hurt our relationship with the community. And I know that there's no excuse for what I did. Washington spoke for the first time since Derek had entered the office. Officer Thompson, do you understand that what happened tonight wasn't just a mistake or an error in judgment? Do you understand that your behavior constituted racial profiling and civil rights violations? Derek looked at Washington, then back at the chief. Yes, sir. I understand that now. Now? Washington pressed. You understand it now? What about when you were demanding to search my belongings without cause? What about when you claimed to smell alcohol and marijuana when there was none? What about when you threatened to arrest me for exercising my constitutional rights? Derek's face flushed red. I don't know what I was thinking. That's exactly the problem, Washington replied. You weren't thinking, you were reacting based on racial bias and stereotypes, and you let those biases override your training, your common sense, and your basic human decency. Chief Rodriguez leaned forward. Thompson, effective immediately, you are suspended without pay pending a full internal affairs investigation. You will surrender your badge, your weapon, and all department equipment before you leave this building tonight. Derek's shoulders sagged. He'd known this was coming, but hearing it made it real in a way that twisted his stomach into knots. Furthermore, the chief continued, I am recommending that the district attorney's office review this case for possible criminal charges. Your actions tonight may have violated federal civil rights laws. Derek felt like he might throw up. Criminal charges meant more than just losing his job. It meant possible jail time, fines, a permanent criminal record. Chief, Derek said desperately, please, I have a family. I have a mortgage. This job is all I know. You should have thought about that before you decided to harass a citizen based on the color of his skin, Chief Rodriguez replied coldly. Washington stood up. Chief, if there's nothing else you need from me tonight, I'd like to go home. It's been a very long day. Of course, Joseph. And again, I'm sorry this happened. Washington nodded and headed for the door. As he reached it, he turned back to Derek. Officer Thompson, I want you to understand something. What happened tonight didn't hurt just me. It hurt every member of this department who works hard to build trust with the community. It hurt every black citizen who now has one more reason to fear the police. And it hurt the very idea of justice and equality that we're supposed to represent. After Washington left, Chief Rodriguez and Derek sat in silence for several minutes. "Ma'am," Derek finally said, "what can I do to make this right?" Chief Rodriguez looked at him with something that might have been disappointment or disgust. "Thompson, there is no making this right. What you did tonight is going to follow you for the rest of your life. The videos will never go away. Your name will forever be associated with racial profiling and police misconduct." She stood up and walked around her desk to face him directly. "The only thing you can do now is learn from this experience and make sure that no other officer ever makes the same mistakes you did tonight." By midnight, Derek Thompson was officially suspended from the Metropolitan Police Department. The story had been picked up by national news outlets, and the videos had been viewed over 10 million times. The real consequences were just beginning. 6 months later, the Metropolitan Police Department looked very different than it had on that September night when Derek Thompson made the worst decision of his career. The changes had started almost immediately. Within a week of the incident, Chief Rodriguez had announced a comprehensive review of all police training programs, with a particular focus on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. The department brought in outside experts, community leaders, and civil rights organizations to help develop new protocols. Derek Thompson was no longer part of any of it. The internal affairs investigation had been swift and thorough. Commander Washington had insisted on complete transparency, allowing outside oversight and community involvement in the process. The findings were damning. Derek had violated 17 separate department policies and procedures during his encounter. With Washington, the criminal case had been even more serious. Federal prosecutors charged Derek with violating Washington's civil rights under color of law, a felony that carried potential prison time. Derek's lawyer had advised him to accept a plea bargain: 1 year in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and permanent disqualification from working in law enforcement. Derek took the deal. He was currently serving his sentence at a minimum security federal facility 2 hours outside the city. His wife had filed for divorce after the scandal destroyed their marriage and their finances. They'd lost the house when Derek's legal bills mounted, and his wife's job wasn't enough to cover the mortgage. But Derek's downfall was only part of the story. Officer Rachel Martinez had undergone extensive retraining and counseling after the incident. The department's investigation found that while she had tried to de-escalate the situation, she hadn't been aggressive enough in stopping her partner's misconduct. She received a formal reprimand and was required to complete 40 hours of additional training on intervention techniques. 6 months later, Rachel had become one of the department's most vocal advocates for officer accountability. She spoke at training sessions, sharing her experience from that night and emphasizing the importance of stepping up when witnessing inappropriate behavior from fellow officers. "I learned that staying silent isn't neutral," she would tell new recruits. "When you see a fellow officer violating someone's rights and you don't act decisively to stop it, you become part of the problem." The department had also implemented a new early warning system designed to identify officers who showed patterns of problematic behavior before they escalated to serious misconduct. Derek's personnel file, when reviewed after the incident, had revealed several citizen complaints over the years that had been dismissed or inadequately investigated. Commander Washington had used the incident as a catalyst for broader reforms. Working with Chief Rodriguez and community leaders, he had established the Community Oversight Board, giving citizens a direct role in reviewing police misconduct cases. The board included representatives from various ethnic communities, civil rights organizations, and legal experts. "What happened to me that night happens to ordinary citizens every day," Washington had said at the board's first meeting. "The difference is that I had a badge and rank to protect me. We need to ensure that every citizen receives the same respect and protection under the law, regardless of their position or background." The reforms hadn't been limited to policy changes. The department had also launched a comprehensive community outreach program, with officers required to spend time in the neighborhoods they patrolled, attending community meetings and building relationships with residents. Washington himself had become a frequent speaker at police academies and departments across the country, sharing his experience and the lessons learned from that night on Maple Street. His message was always the same. Police officers must be held to the highest standards of conduct, and departments must be willing to confront racism and bias within their ranks. We cannot build trust with the community if we allow officers to treat some citizens as less deserving of respect and dignity than others, he would tell audiences of police officers and community leaders. The incident had also sparked changes beyond the police department. The mayor had established a citywide task force on racial equity, examining policies and practices across all municipal departments. The local district attorney's office had created a special unit focused exclusively on prosecuting police misconduct cases. For the Riverside Heights community, the incident had been a wake-up call. Many residents who had never experienced or witnessed racial profiling were forced to confront the reality that their neighbors faced different treatment from law enforcement. A neighborhood association formed specifically to address these issues, organizing regular dialogues between police and community members. The woman who had been walking her dog that night, Beverly Chen, had become one of the most active community advocates. She organized monthly meetings where residents could share their experiences and concerns with police officials. That night opened my eyes to something I had been blind to, Beverly would say at these meetings. I realized that my experience with police as an older white woman was completely different from what my black neighbors experienced. We can't fix what we won't acknowledge. The teenager who had filmed the encounter from his porch, Kevin Rodriguez, had used his viral video as a launching pad for activism. Now a freshman at the local university, he spoke regularly at high schools about civil rights and the power of citizen journalism. Everyone with a phone is a potential witness to injustice, Kevin would tell student audiences. We have a responsibility to document what we see and speak up for what's right. The videos from that night had indeed never gone away, as Chief Rodriguez had predicted. They were now used in police training programs across the country as an example of how quickly a routine encounter could escalate when officer bias went unchecked. Law schools used the case study to teach about civil rights law and police accountability. Civil rights organizations pointed to the incident as evidence of the need for ongoing vigilance and reform in law enforcement. Commander Washington had been offered numerous opportunities to leave the department for higher-paying positions in consulting or academia. He had turned them all down. The work isn't finished here, he would say when asked about these offers. Real change takes time, and it requires people who are committed to staying and seeing it through. His own career had been enhanced rather than damaged by the incident. The way he had handled the encounter, remaining calm under pressure, documenting everything and then using the incident as a catalyst for positive change, had earned him respect throughout the law enforcement community. Chief Rodriguez had been re-elected to her position with overwhelming support from both the police union and community organizations, a rare achievement in municipal politics. Her handling of the Thompson case and the subsequent reforms had been praised as a model for other departments. As for Derek Thompson, he was scheduled to be released from prison in another 6 months. He had spent his time in custody participating in counseling programs and educational courses on racial bias and civil rights. His lawyer said he was a changed man, genuinely remorseful for his actions and committed to making amends. But the reality was that Derek's life had been permanently altered by those 20 minutes on Maple Street. He would never work in law enforcement again. His family had been destroyed. His reputation was ruined forever. The night of his encounter with Commander Washington had taught the entire Metropolitan Police Department an important lesson. Actions have consequences, and in the age of social media and cell phone cameras, those consequences could be swift, severe, and permanent. More importantly, it had shown that real change was possible when departments were willing to confront uncomfortable truths about racism and bias in policing. The reforms implemented in the wake of the incident had made the department more accountable, more transparent, and more connected to the community it served. 6 months after that September night, Commander Washington still walked through the Riverside Heights neighborhood on his way home from work, but now neighbors would wave and call out greetings. Children would stop to talk to him about his job. Community members would approach him with concerns and suggestions. The change hadn't been easy, and it wasn't complete. But it was real. And it was lasting. And it had all started with one police officer's decision to let his biases override his training, and one commander's decision to use that failure as an opportunity to build something better.